Hey there, students. Tom Richey here for one last review session before the AP exam. Looks like the chat on YouTube is just lit out there, okay? And so what you'll see if you look at the link in the description, I am running one last salon, okay? So basically what we're going to do, because, you know, a lot of people out there in the YouTube chat, y'all keep going, keep having fun. I'm going to look over there once in a while, but we've got kind of a freemium setup where this is streaming, but I'm largely catering to the people here in the salon. Okay, so I'm here in the salon, which you can join us if you if you want to come in here with us. But everybody's free to watch what's going on this last review question. But I am catering to the people who are here in the salon. More, if you want to come into the salon, there is a link in the description. So let's go ahead and get started. Occasionally, we'll do some shout outs and stuff like that too. But I'm going to cater to the salon. Okay, so let's see. Moran, you were asking about the effects of the Catholic Reformation. Okay, the Catholic Reformation, also known as the Counter-Reformation. Let's see, a Catholic Reformation, AP Euro. If you search for Catholic Reformation AP Euro, you're going to find, you'll see my video up there. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see where I've got a PDF from my friends at Marco Learning, which which you can Google. Just go AP Euro Catholic Reformation, and here is a direct link. But you can find that on Google. But I'm going to go ahead and put that on the screen there. And this is something we're working on these things. Those of you taking A-Push next year, we're going to have some more of these types of things for A-Push. So make sure that you're staying in touch with me and our friends at Marco Learning, okay? Because this is just great stuff for reviewing, makes it very efficient, okay? So Ignatius of Loyola would be the most important person for you to know there, the Jesuits, okay? So as far as we want to understand, we're thinking about the context of the Catholic Reformation, or the Counter-Reformation, as it's also called, is that the Catholic Church has really been taking a beating with the Reformation. Martin Luther is, launching an attack. We see that Henry VIII, we see Calvin. The Catholic Church then has to regroup, okay? The Catholic Church has to regroup and figure out how is it that we are going to, have a Catholic resurgence? And actually that does happen, okay? So when we think about the resurgence of Catholicism, it's largely because of the Counter-Reformation. And so some decades after Luther's 95 Theses. So we want to understand, the main things we want to understand are the Jesuit order, first of all. The Jesuit order is one of many new religious orders, okay, known as the Society of Jesus, okay? Now, we see the establishment of new religious orders that are invigorating the Catholic Church, such as the Jesuits. The Council of Trent. This is a council of Catholic bishops that met between 1545 and 1563, okay, to determine the Catholic Church's response to Protestantism. Okay, then we see here anathema, let them be anathema. These are curses that are given that are denouncing Protestant doctrines. Another product of the Counter-Reformation is the Index of Prohibited Books, where the Catholic Church is saying that these books should not be read. And that is not abolished for some centuries after that. Now, continuity and change is very important, because when we think about the Council of Trent, the first thing we think about the Council of Trent, continuity, an affirmation of Catholic doctrine. Okay, so we see here with the Council of Trent, an affirmation of Catholic doctrine, the primacy of the Pope, traditional Catholic beliefs. There are no Catholic beliefs that are changed. There were some people at the Council of Trent, some of the bishops said maybe we should accommodate some of these Protestant beliefs. The majority says no. We are not going to accommodate Protestant beliefs. So the primacy of the Pope, traditional Catholic beliefs about the role of faith and good works in attaining salvation. Now then, the Council of Trent represented change, because the Council of Trent was a reformation of church practices, okay? So what we want to understand here is that on one hand, we've got the affirmation of Catholic doctrine, and then the reformation of church practices. So affirmation of Catholic doctrine, reformation of church practice. So we see here new religious orders, establishing seminaries to train and educate priests, and banning the sale of indulgences. Okay, so that's something that you want to keep in mind there for the Catholic Reformation. Now, then note Ignatius of Loyola and the Jesuits. Now, another useful person to know is Teresa of Avila, who was a monastic reformer. She reformed the Carmelite order, and we want to understand as well the connection between Baroque art and the Catholic Reformation. That Baroque art was used to glorify the Catholic Church and contribute to the Catholic Reformation. So we see that happening here. All right, so with that, we see the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. This is a sculpture by Bernini, and this is showing, like, on an altarpiece, we see here that Saint Teresa is experiencing the spiritual ecstasy. So the Catholic Church is showing, look, we have a source of spirituality that the Protestants can't compete with. Like the Calvinists certainly can't compete with this type of ornate beauty. So when you look at the Baroque, which is showing the grandeur and the beauty and the power of the Catholic Church. Now, the Baroque is also appropriated by absolutists, but great topic there, and one of those that, we did have a Marco learning guide for. Remember, you can just go to Google and you can just Google Catholic Reformation AP Euro guide. Okay, so study guide. Let's see if we search for study guide, it might be like the, so yeah, so we see here the Catholic Reformation. Okay, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, we'll then go to our next question. Okay, so our next question. So, and y'all feel free, those of you here in the salon, if y'all want to get a shout out. Okay, so yeah, we see here a shout out to Miss Bowman. Okay, so Miss Bowman at Laurelton Hall, she is the best. And Mr. Borges gets a shout out. Thank you, Isabella. Good to see you here again. So how do I feel to say documents qualify, contradict, or corroborate each other? Okay, so when we think about this in the Marco learning stream, I was doing a DDQ on the age of exploration. And so when we think about that, like when documents corroborate, we're putting them into argumentative groups. Okay, so what you're seeing here is you're seeing that these documents have the same kind of viewpoint, the same kind of opinion here. And so with that, we're going to see here that I would say that in my paragraph so in my paragraph, my topic sentence says here, European explorers were mostly concerned. And if you want that document, go to Marco Learning's channel and look at the Lunch with Marco broadcast. I've got a link to this Google document. It looks like several people are in there right now. So European explorers were mostly concerned about gaining wealth through getting gold and spices. So then I'll note here that in Peru, Pizarro hears from a native chief who promises to fill rooms with gold and silver and appears to fear for his life. Pizarro was not alone in his cruelty. Bartolome de las Casas, a Spanish priest, wrote that the Spanish were acting like animals, torturing natives because they were greedy and wanted gold. Okay, and then we see here, so basically we're using these documents to support the same argument, putting them in context, in conversation with each other. So these three documents are organized to support an argument based on the topic sentence. And we see here also some outside evidence. We see some POV plus here as well. Okay, so it's a very organized exposition. And so when you've got them set up like this, these documents are being used as evidence together. And we can also note when two documents seem to contradict each other. That is definitely a strategy that you can use to contribute to complex understanding. Allie, welcome back. Good to see you here. How's Linus? And can I shout out to Miss Gerhardt at New Trier? She's the best. Yes, definitely. And so with that, the biggest thing that you want to do here is make sure that you're organizing your documents to support arguments, not just like document 1 says, document 2 says, that you're actually thinking about. It's like puzzle pieces, okay? Mr. McCulloch, shout out to Mr. McCulloch, okay? So, and Mr. McCulloch's classes, good luck to y'all today. And so going from that, these documents qualify, contradict, corroborate. You're using them either to show how I can put them together, show how this document can support this argument, or these two documents disagree. But I think typically corroboration, like, this argument is supported by that document and that document. Now, How do you write a thesis that doesn't try to achieve the complexity point? Okay, now the thing is, a thesis statement just has to follow a line of reasoning. Okay, so when we're looking at this, a thesis statement needs to take a clear position, and it includes a line of reasoning. So Chloe, as I've said before, I don't care unless somebody has written 10-point essays several times in 45 minutes in practice settings, unless that has been replicated. We want to make sure that you're not trying. Remember, don't try it, Anakin. I have the high ground. That's something that you want to avoid. So here's when we think about how to write a basic thesis. Okay, now as far as that goes, basic thesis can either have complementary points or it can have contradictory points. Okay, so when we think about this, a thesis. Okay, so when we put this here, let me show you like 3 different ways that we could write a thesis. And remember, if you want to come into the salon, those of you watching on YouTube, if you want to join us in the salon, there is information in the video description how you can come into the salon, ask questions, get priority for shout outs and all that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to put 3 thesis types. Okay, so we're going to say basic, complementary, basic thesis. This would be complementary. Complementary points. Okay, so we think about this, complementary points. And then, so a basic thesis, complementary points, basic thesis, counterpoint, and then a complex thesis. Okay. Okay, so when we're thinking about a basic thesis and we're thinking about like how we could answer this question. So, a complex thesis, an example would be this one here. So evaluate whether European colonial expansion was motivated more by economics or religion in the period 1450 to 1700. So my complex thesis, colonial expansion during the Age of Exploration, was focused primarily on economics because the explorers were looking primarily to expand trade in gold and spices. However, there were also religious reasons because explorers and priests sought to convert native people to Christianity. Now, note here, primarily, okay? So it takes a clear side, okay? Takes a clear side, but while also being nuanced, okay? So we note here in a basic thesis, colonial expansion during the Age of Exploration was focused mainly on economics because explorers were looking for gold and also, enslaved natives to use them for labor. Okay, so also and what we could do here is we could even bring in the slave trade. That's another thing that wasn't in the documents. And so also used natives and slaves for labor. So for labor to produce profits. Okay, so that's something basically complementary points. Okay, complementary points here that we're seeing here. So then you could say a basic thesis, a point counterpoint. Okay, so colonial expansion was driven by economics. Colonial expansion during the Age of Exploration was driven by economics because explorers wanted gold and spices. Okay, it was also driven by religion because because priests sought to convert natives. Okay, so what we see here is we've got a basic thesis, complementary points. basic thesis, point counterpoint. Notice no clear side is taken, okay? Any of these would be acceptable, okay? So what we're going to note here is all of the following theses are acceptable, okay? Acceptable. So we note here that the third one can contribute to complex understanding. The first two would not necessarily contribute to complex understanding. But we do want to note that all of these are acceptable when we're looking at them, okay? So that's an example of 3 different thesis types: your complementary points, point counterpoint without taking a side, and then we see here the complex thesis takes a clear side while also being nuanced, okay? And that is this is the one that's these two are going to allow you to use the most documents, okay? This one may exclude some documents because it is narrow, but you can write a thesis with complementary points, use 3 documents to support it, and you can make 8 points. You can score an 8-point essay with a basic thesis with complementary points, 3 documents to support, and outside evidence. Your outside evidence is going to make a big deal in determining your thesis and the format that you use here. So that's something to note here. All right. So with that, let's go ahead and yeah. So Chloe, I'm glad I can help you. And so with that, what do you look for when reading a document? So Najma, what you want to think about here is that that when you're reading a document, first of all, you want to understand what it says. Okay, that's the first thing that has to happen is you have to understand what it says. And then the second thing is you've got to figure out, you know, what can I do to use this for an argument? So when you see that as I went through here in that session with in the Lunch with Marco session on Marco Learning's channel, that what we did here is we went through and basically went through the documents, and I want to understand what it says. Then I want to think about what argument would I support. So since the prompt is asking economics or religion, then we want to say, okay, this one, I'm going to use it to support economic motives. Now, for 2 documents, you also want to go into, you know, how are you going to do point of view, context, audience, or purpose? And so these are the 3 things. And actually, the other thing you want to note, are you going to strike it? I used all 5 documents because I was demonstrating, but most of you are going to want to use the 3 that are going to be easiest for you, and you're going to run out of time if you try to use 5, okay? So again, the only people that should be going for 10 points are people who are, you know, who have done this several times, more than once, under timed conditions. Okay. So as far as that goes, you know, that's what you're looking for in your reading documents. First of all, do I understand what this is saying? Second of all, is there something in this document I can use to support an argument? You need to have those 2 to use the document. If you understand what it says, well, you can get that first point, but you're not going to be able to get the point for supporting an argument. And then for some of your documents, you will also bring in a POV plus. All right. Yes. Good luck, Allie, with Linus. You've got this. Okay. We need a picture of Linus put out there sometime. All right. And so with that, how do you know what type of POV plus to use? Okay, so Dylan, here's something about POV plus. Okay, so when we're thinking about point of view, context, audience, purpose. Now, you can use any of them. Okay, so really, you know which type to use because it's the one that makes most sense to you. Most of you should understand. Okay, so if we're thinking about this, which do you prefer? Okay, so which do you prefer to use? Okay, so which one is your favorite? Okay, so when we think about that, you know, POV, context, historical context. Okay, so what is the one that you prefer to use? Okay, from my experience, people who are, you know, who know a lot of the content are going to have the best time with historical context. Okay, now point of view can be good if you're just good at analyzing like motives and how someone's situation like controls the way, you know, impacts the way they think. Audience, I find, is typically the most difficult, you know, the most advanced of these. And then purpose. purpose. Now, one thing that I'll note here, just remember, I've got a video that's a 7-minute video on the 2020 rubric. Okay, so I've got a video on the 2020 rubric that is new. That's a 7-minute video. You might want to look at that when we get off of this broadcast at 3:30. Okay, so historical context. If you know a lot of history, if you know something about the document that's going on around it, okay, so that's something that so you look, well, you've got to go beyond the source line, okay, because it can't just be what's in the source. It's really got, you look at what's in the source line, you're thinking, kind of like, what I did with that last document, where we see that this is published by a Jesuit. Okay, so when we look here, we see that this last document is published by a Jesuit. And so what we can do here is we think about, okay, we can't just say that he's a Jesuit. That's not going to be enough. But what we can do is we can provide our, basically some context. Like, we know who the Jesuits are. The Jesuits' primary mission is to spread Catholicism far and wide, whether to get Protestants to convert back or whether to get people from other places to convert to Christianity. And so we see here, now we could even bring in Francis Xavier, if y'all know about him. So basically, I find historical context to be the best because it provides explanations where you see, of course, the Jesuits aren't going to be motivated by economics because the Jesuits are a religious order that is dedicated to converting as many people to Catholicism as possible, founded by Ignatius of Loyola, who we were just talking about here. So with that, we've got that. So you should know which one of the POV plus categories is your favorite. And a lot of you who've studied a lot, probably historical context, okay? If we have time at the end, would it be best to, okay, so this is where, Claire, you're getting into what I call a knockout punch, okay? So what I call a knockout punch is that, you would put a final paragraph. Now, if you have time, like you're saying, if you have time at the end. So the format that I recommend: thesis statement, body paragraphs, go back and put some contextualization up top, or go on and do your knockout punch, where you've got, events following the topic, events related to the topic in Europe, or events related to the topic to the rest of the world. Now, what I do typically, what I would counsel is, for example, the Marco Learning DBQ that's available on marcolearning.com on the English Civil War. This is something that this English Civil War DBQ is something that we are, it goes through the English Civil War, but it doesn't go into the Glorious Revolution. So your knockout punch is to say, the English Civil War didn't really fully establish a constitutional system, but it did, the English Civil War it didn't fully establish a constitutional system, but guess what did? So we fast forward a little bit, we go into the next period. It's kind of like a track runner. If any of y'all run track, cross country or track, that you run through the finish line. So what I think is the easiest thing to do is just to keep running through the finish line. So if it's about the English Civil War, go into the Glorious Revolution. And so with that, Claire, I think that that's going to be my personal favorite. How do you use a document to disprove the other argument? I'm not sure what we're dealing with disproving, Dylan. You might have to make this a little more clear to me. My Age of Exploration DBQ that I've got here, I've got it on marcolearning.com, but I'll go ahead, or not marcolearning.com, but on Marco Learning's YouTube channel. When you look at the Lunch with Marco, we've got that there. Those of you in the salon, I'll go ahead and post a link here. Remember, if you want to join us in the salon and ask a question, there is a link in the description. This is catering to people who just they're like, look, I want to ask, I've got a question I want to ask, and I'm willing to pay a small fee to be in the salon. But those of you watching on YouTube, I think you're getting useful review as well. So you don't have to necessarily disprove the counter argument. Just make sure you don't have to make an unnuanced argument. Okay, like you can say that the Age of Exploration was mostly about economics, but here it did have some religious elements. And you don't have to disprove that it had religious elements. And so when you see like evaluate whether or not Napoleon upheld the ideals of the French Revolution, Napoleon upheld the ideals mostly because of this and this, but he didn't uphold the ideals in this position. Okay, so support other position. Now, yeah, I've got that all in the essay here. Let me know, Dylan, if there's anything in particular in that sample essay that is unclear. Okay, so take a look at that. Ask me about something, because I'm showing you basically here's how to get a full credit essay, and everything's noted here, what points are being scored by what. So as far as this goes, here's another thing. We really don't want to ask too many questions about like new writing tricks. I would counsel people against generally trying something during the DBQ that you haven't practiced. So for example, a gymnast, okay, when you think about a gymnast, an Olympic gymnast, they don't go out there and just do some kind of routine that they just like, hey, I feel like doing this today. I've never tried this, but you know what? I've always wondered what it'd be like to like flip 3 times before hitting the ground. That's something that they're doing, like they've practiced over and over again. Figure skaters, they're not freestyling. They've practiced it over and over and over again. So when it comes to writing, make sure that you're using mostly strategies that you've done before. So contextualization, Najma, I typically recommend at least 3 content-rich sentences, and I prefer to include a specific detail, You don't want, like contextualization, a lot of people get confused about contextualization because they believe that because we're doing background, then, because we're only establishing background, then it should be vague. And the thing is, it should not be vague. It should include detail. So at least one sentence should include a specific detail. So for example, if it's about something about absolutism, then I would contextualize absolutism going into defining it and basically what are the traits of absolute monarchs. And then I would make a specific statement about Louis XIV or Peter the Great. So for example, if the DBQ is about Peter the Great, in my contextualization, I would explain absolutism in general, and then I would note how Louis XIV built his palace at Versailles, and he brought the nobles there and kept an eye on them. That would be something that I think you need something clear, clearly specific. I always think about a Star Wars opening crawl, where it gives you the information you need in order to do what you need to do. So with contextualization, I typically recommend. Okay, call himself the Sun King. I'd be a little bit more than that, but yeah, you want a specific detail about Louis XIV. So your contextualization should include somewhere at least one, I prefer like maybe two, I prefer 2 specific details. And so what is a good, so a good DBQ that stands out and impresses me. First of all, organized. Okay, if you want to impress your reader, because the reader is reading this as a human. And remember that those of y'all who are always asking, how do I get the complexity point? The best way to get the complexity point is to write an overall, like, excellent, even brilliant essay. Nobody's going to write a brilliant essay. Okay, nobody's going to write a brilliant essay and not so. As far as a brilliant essay, nobody's going to write a brilliant essay and not get the complexity point. Okay, that's what we want to understand, that nobody's going to write something brilliant and not get the complexity point. So that is something that I think is very important there. So a first impression, make sure that don't start your DBQ with throughout history, comma. That's one thing that like your reader will start laughing. Okay, like your reader will like chuckle and it's like, oh, another one of those, where it starts with something like throughout history. That's something that's never going to be something that's going to, now It could get better, but typically when students start with something like throughout history, you're not looking to read something impressive. So make sure your first sentence makes a good first impression on the reader. That's just something you don't want to get into things that are like cliche. The other thing is make it easy to read. Okay, so when you look at this, if you follow an organized format, okay, what readers like. Readers have 10 points that they're going to give out. This can be torture if somebody writes a disorganized essay. And you know what? The reader's only going to do so much to squeeze points out of a disorganized essay. The best essays are in the essays that readers like to read and will maximize points. They are very organized and clear. So for example, now, can contextualization be anywhere in the essay? Yes, but the reader typically expects to give that point in the first paragraph. So if the reader's expecting to see contextualization here, put it here. The thesis then is there. The thesis should be 1 to 2 sentences. Don't ramble on your thesis. Be efficient there. That you see here, I've got the thesis really shouldn't be more than 4 lines of text is plenty. If we unbold this, it's like 4 lines of text is plenty for a thesis. Now, if you go to 5, but if you're getting like 8 lines of text and you're like, this is my thesis statement, come on now. And so then notice here, topic sentence, document is cited specifically, it is parenthetically cited, then it's followed by some POV plus, okay? Then we've got another document. Then we see here kind of a sentence that's noting corroboration, okay? So we see here, this sentence, this is a transition sentence to indicate corroboration between document 3 and document 4. Corroboration is that they're on the same side, okay? So as a priest, De Las Casas was in the New World to convert natives to Christianity, a POV plus. So basically, topic sentence, describe the document's content, POV plus. Describe the document's content. We're going to transition to the next one. Describe the document's content, POV plus. Outside evidence at the end of the paragraph. It's very clear this stuff's not mixed together, okay? We don't want something like that's just mixed together and the reader has to hunt for points, okay? So when I'm scoring this essay, I'm like, okay, contextualization, 1 point. Thesis, 1 point, okay? Using 2 documents, we can tell what they say, 1 point. They're argumentative. That's another point because they support this claim in the topic sentence. I see a POV plus here, 1 point. I see another POV plus here, 1 point. And then we see here, then an outside evidence at the end, piece of outside evidence, 7 points, okay? So we see here that it's making it very easy for the reader to go through and assign points, okay? So then we see, okay, we've got a couple more documents. So now we have the 4 documents, and then we've got another piece of outside evidence here. So we see here that everything is there, okay? So the reader is able to very easily, now here's another thing. The reason I recommend restating the thesis is when I was an AP reader for 8 years, what I would do when I didn't see a good thesis in the first paragraph, like maybe there wasn't a thesis or there was an attempt at one that I just wasn't buying it, first thing I do is I flip to the end of the essay. Is there a thesis there? And so this is where I have restated my thesis. Now note, a concluding paragraph does not do anything for you unless you're getting into some kind of complex understanding that you're trying to establish by showing that you can go into the next period. Like if I wanted to go here and I wanted to explain something about like the new imperialism or something like that, but I'd probably put that in a separate paragraph there. If I wanted to compare it to the new imperialism, then I'd put something like that there. That's a strategy for complex understanding as well. So one thing that you can note here, even if you had like a basic thesis here, you could still get complex understanding, possibly as long as the essay was overall of good quality by putting a paragraph there, making some useful comparisons to the new imperialism. Again, just note that the reader does not owe you complex understanding. That's one thing to note here. The reader does not owe you complex understanding. A brilliant essay is a brilliant essay. Okay, that's the thing, that basically this rubric is so inflexible. 9 out of 10 points are inflexible. That 10th point is where the reader really gets to decide for themselves, given a number of criteria, whether they want to give it that point for complexity. And the main thing here, it's not just that it's basically like this essay is not like the rest of them. Okay, that's what you're seeing there. And so then can we discuss the roles of women through the course and how they advocate for rights? We most certainly can. Okay, so first of all, we want to be thinking about we want to think about women in terms of the Renaissance. Okay, so women in terms of the Renaissance, you see that women were typically excluded from the Renaissance, from Renaissance humanism. All of these humanists that we go into, Erasmus, Machiavelli, Castiglione, Petrarch, Pico, Della Mirandola, they're all men. Okay, this is something that, remember, kids, to stay hydrated. Now, what I would do, just a piece of advice, I'd hydrate really well right now. Okay, hydrate really well right now so that your body can process it before the exam. I would not recommend like having a beverage nearby or anything like that. Like, I would go ahead, drink yourself like a good glass of water or two. Your body will process it before the exam. You can sit down and take your exam. I notice sometimes something like even taking a drink of water while you're writing an essay, a timed essay, it can get your train of thought because you're thinking, oh, I want water. So make sure, go ahead and hydrate right now. Make sure that you are hydrating right now and you are ready. Don't consume like any sugar or anything like that. If you're drinking like any kind of caffeine, like I would keep it kind of light, like a cup of tea or something like that, or maybe like a fraction of a cup of coffee, but something without sugar in it. Okay, you don't want to crash right now. So let's be sure that we're going ahead and getting ready. So be hydrated now. Don't hydrate right before the exam. But I noticed last night when I was doing something, when I just paused to get a glass, to take a sip of water, it gets your train of thought. You have to refocus. So you want to make sure that you are ready to focus. Okay, so get yourself some water right now. So when we're looking at women during the Renaissance, they're not taught Latin. Okay, like Latin and Greek, these are things that are taught to men. For example, when Petrarch wrote sonnets, love poetry was written in the vernacular language, but partly because women didn't tend to understand the classical languages. And so love poetry would be written in the vernacular, whereas epic poetry, that Petrarch, such as he wrote Africa, about Scipio Africanus, like epic poetry, that's for the boys. And so when he's writing for the boys, he writes in Latin. Okay, so when he's writing for the girls, he's going to write in the vernacular, but he's writing for the boys, he writes in Latin. Scholarly work, typically written in Latin, a language that was not typically taught to women. Now, what we'll notice in the Reformation, because now remember, the printing press is a causal factor for three different things: the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Scientific Revolution. So the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Scientific Revolution, these are all three with the printing press. So the Renaissance, we've got a general increase in literacy because printed material is available. People have a reason to read. If I didn't have a single book in my house, why do I need to read? I can just get a notary to do all my legal documents for me. I don't need to read. But now there's a reason to read. The Reformation, remember, Martin Luther's 95 Theses are spread out there. Okay, so Martin Luther's 95 Theses are spread out. And so then also when, the Scientific Revolution, it allows people who are involved in scientific inquiry to communicate across the continent, even if they're dead. Remember, Copernicus published his work posthumously. Galileo picked it up and did some experiments. He confirmed it with his telescope. So going with that, we want to note about the Reformation that literacy in Protestant communities tended to increase because of the emphasis on the individual reading the Bible, a printed text, a classical text, and that everybody should read it, even women. Okay, that maybe women should, by their standards, be quiet in church and not have leadership positions in the church, but a woman was encouraged to read the Bible. Okay, so, the Bible needed to be read by everyone. So we see an increase in literacy. Now, as far as the Industrial Revolution, notice that women were often employed in the factories. So women are working in these factories. Their fingers tend to be more nimble for the machines. And so women are working in a lot of these factories. One thing that I want to note, agricultural societies, such as we saw during the Renaissance and the Reformation, the man does not go out to work while the woman stays home and cooks and cleans and takes care of the kids. Okay. So the thing is to note that in agricultural societies, work is shared. Okay. So that's something we've also got. Let's see, AP Euro, Northern Renaissance. So one thing that I'll show you here, if we search for AP Euro Northern Renaissance Study Guide, okay, you'll find this. This is a study guide put out by my friends at Marco Learning. So let's look at this other one here that can be useful as well. So let me just kind of show you when we look at agricultural labor and how that works. Because when I've seen people writing questions about women, it's just they say, oh yeah, women just cooked and cleaned and took care of kids, and not really. Okay, let's not get into that. Because in agricultural societies, here is Bruegel. This is a piece of Northern Renaissance art. This work is called The Harvesters. And what you see here in The Harvesters, this is something that is a piece of art that is showing like what work looked like. So you see that men and women are out there doing agricultural labor together. So it's the Industrial Revolution that starts, pulling people out of the home and working outside the home. So that's something that you definitely want to note here, is that in agricultural societies, men and women are generally working together. Okay, and so with that, we've got here the Italian Renaissance and the Northern Renaissance were different because the Northern Renaissance humanists were more religious and focused more on social reform, while Italian humanists were more focused on secular concerns and individual achievement. When we think about Machiavelli, Castiglione, and civic humanists, Italian Renaissance and Northern Renaissance were similar because both Renaissances studied the classics, Greek, Roman, and biblical literature, and modeled their writings after classical authors. Okay, so going with that, we see here Erasmus, who is the primary figure in the Northern Renaissance, a Christian humanist. Okay, so just understand that women didn't like stay in and cook and clean while the man went to work. They're all out there doing agricultural labor together. And so we start to see like a difference in the way, in men's work and women's work. We see more of that as the Industrial Revolution comes around. And so one thing to note here is that during the French Revolution, we have Mary Wollstonecraft. Now, the French Revolution was not a feminist revolution, but it was kind of the birth of like feminist movements, and especially like liberal feminism, where Mary Wollstonecraft first wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Man. Okay, so Mary Wollstonecraft wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Man, which was a defense of the French Revolution. Okay, so let's see. Let me go. Let me open this up here and just take a little look. I'll take you through some of my slides for my, Women and the French Revolution series. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look here. Give you a few things that may be useful to you here. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and let's see if I can close a few windows. All right. Okay, so we'll say, yeah. All right. So, women in the French Revolution, okay? So, all men were not equal in the old regime, much less women, okay? Note here that, the way that, we see during the Enlightenment, especially in Rousseau's work, separate spheres, that men have a sphere and women have a sphere. And so, when you look at Rousseau, he said, mother, do not make a decent man out of your daughter, make a decent woman out of her. So, what Rousseau's saying basically is that men and women are different and they should be educated differently. Now, we can see that in Jacques-Louis David's work. The best way I've got to explain Rousseau is through Jacques-Louis David's art. Okay, so when we look at David, the Oath of the Horatii. Now, remember that Neoclassicism is something that is a piece of art, an art movement that is associated typically with with the Enlightenment and the French Revolution. Neoclassicism. We see with the Enlightenment, we see the decline of the Baroque. Thank you, Annabella and Marcos CR for following me on Instagram recently. Also, Emma Jo Beth. Thank y'all for the recent Instagram follows. I'll occasionally shout out to new Instagram followers. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and take a look at this painting. Now, note that that Jacques-Louis David is very much influenced by Rousseau. We see the men here in the Oath of the Horatii. Now, it's Neoclassicism, so we've got Romans here, okay? And so we see here where they are saluting. Are they Nazis, Walter? Not exactly. They are giving a Roman salute. And so the men are about to go fight for their country. Now, they are giving their own lives in defense of the community. They are submitting to the general will, as Rousseau would say. Now, the women over here notice that they are worried about their husbands. Okay, is my husband going to die? They are cuddled up. They are just, they're crying. They're too weak to be in the public sphere where men belong. That is Rousseau talking there, not me. And then we see a woman who is huddling her children. So what we see here is that Jacques-Louis David is showing these separate spheres. Adrian Medina, Matt Lipka, and Alex, thank you so much. Vinay, Asalit, Barbara M20, thank y'all so much for the recent follows. All right, so with that, that's where we see this emphasis on separate spheres. And then when you look here at, at Rousseau, now, of course, some of this gets back to some things here where you look before the Enlightenment, where, women are, portrayed as like basically something happens during the full moon, stuff like that. The whole idea of being hysterical, when somebody says you're being hysterical, that comes from the female anatomy, that somebody gets a hysterectomy. You're being hysterical. You're acting like a woman. That is where that comes from. That's the etymology. And so we see there where Eve, is the one who is sinning first. And so Pandora's box. So Marie Antoinette, notice how Marie Antoinette's kind of scapegoated during the French Revolution in a way. Now, certainly she had a luxurious life, but is scapegoated quite a bit here. And so Edmund Burke was someone who was a British member of Parliament who criticized the French Revolution. And especially when you see that, after the death of Marie Antoinette, Burke criticized the French Revolution from a conservative perspective. Now, Olympe de Gouges wrote The Rights of Woman, the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen. So she wrote this in response to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Female Citizen. So when we start to see that the French Revolution proclaims all men to be equal, Olympe de Gouges is like, look, what about women, especially in terms of the ability to get a divorce? That basically traditional marriage, she said, is basically something that enslaves a woman, and that marriage should be based on the mutual pursuit of happiness. That you should have a marriage vows that say basically that we'll stay together for as long as it's convenient for us, as long as it makes us happy. So remember that Enlightenment morality is not based on Christianity, but is based on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so we see here that Olympe de Gouges is advocating for women. Now, even though Olympe de Gouges was beheaded during the Reign of Terror for being a Girondin, she was beheaded for being a Girondin, not for being a woman. And so, what we see here is that, with Olympe de Gouges, that she's writing something that is not going to be instantly heard. But during the Reign of Terror, we do see that there are equal rights for women and men to divorce their husbands, that a woman can sue for a no-fault divorce the same as her husband. Now, Napoleon, with the Napoleonic Code, makes it a little more traditional, but not quite back to the old regime. Okay, not quite back to the old regime. So under the Napoleonic Code, if Julia Grace from Roseville, if her, if she were cheating on her husband for any reason, her husband could sue for divorce. Her husband could divorce her on the basis of that. Now, her husband would not be able to she would not be able to sue for divorce from her husband unless her husband brought the mistress into the home. So we have a double standard here for divorce for men and women under the Napoleonic Code. But it should be noted that the Napoleonic Code was not any less generous toward women than any of the law codes that were out there at the time. So, he does deserve some credit. There are, like a woman can say, like, look, my husband has embarrassed me and I want to file for a divorce. So that's something to note there. But that's something that happens often with Napoleon, that, the reign of terror brings it all the way over here. Napoleon doesn't bring it back to the old regime, but kind of brings it a little more moderate when you think about the Concordat as well, that he's bringing back the Catholic Church, but not as the official state religion that everybody has to follow. And so going from there, Burke versus Wollstonecraft. Okay, so Burke versus Wollstonecraft, where we see the British debate. They are both debating in Britain. And Burke, of course, says that the revolution, he's against it. He says that, look, the French Revolution's moving too fast. That Burke liked the ideas of liberalism. Basically, Britain was already in a lot of ways a lot more liberal than France. But Burke says that our toleration and our liberal institutions were built over a long period of time, whereas France is trying to build them overnight. So, Burke saying, look, rights are inherited. That we have rights because we have a stable society that evolves slowly. Whereas Mary Wollstonecraft is coming from the position of liberalism. Now, she wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Man anonymously because she wouldn't have been taken seriously. So she publishes this at first anonymously. And then she's defending the French Revolution, and of course, in terms of liberalism, in terms of natural rights. And she's going into, like, look, these things that you think are different about men and women, women have not had access to educational opportunities. So that's something that you want to note here. That Mary Wollstonecraft, after she writes, the Declaration of the, not the Declaration, but A Vindication of the Rights of Man, she starts thinking that, now that I've defended the rights of man, now that I can write A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. And so with that, we see that, that the French Revolution had women's political clubs and that sort of thing. But women aren't going to get the right to vote until around World War I. Now, Emmeline Pankhurst, okay, so Emmeline Pankhurst is someone that if feminism ends up being relevant, I would note Emmeline Pankhurst, who was a British suffrage activist, okay, so she is the best person to use as far as the suffrage movement and a leader of the British suffrage movement. So that is something that that is important to note there. So with that, I think that we've got that question. Now, Impressionism, okay? So Impressionism is an art movement. Impressionism is an art movement that is kind of coinciding with the Second Industrial Revolution. And, you look at the advent of photography. So basically, if I want to picture something as it is, then I can just take a picture. Now, the picture is going to be black and white. So here's the thing. Art has got to have a way to compete with, art has to have a way to compete with photography and still show how it can be, how it can be unique. Why would somebody still want to have, art? Well, let's go into that. So with that, let me go ahead and show you just a couple of impressionist works. We want to note that, Impressionism, you have creative use of light and accurate depiction of light, creative use of color. Okay, so going into here, this is an unfinished presentation. One of these days, I hope to finish it, but unfinished right now. But we'll look at a few things here. Okay, and while this is pulling up and thank a few of you. Let's see, we've got Leo the Awesome, Golden D, and Fallon Wolfley and Riley Gustus, Miss Mayhem 15. Thank y'all for the Instagram follows. And also follow Marco Learning if you want to see Marco the dog later on at 6 p.m. We're going to be doing a little stream there. Okay, so on Instagram Live. So with that, taking a look at Impressionism. So you're looking at visible brushstrokes, creative use of color, accurate depiction of light. So you see here with the haystacks, like, you see the brushstrokes, the light is accurately depicted, the colors are creative. And so when you contrast this with a photograph, you see that this is something that, okay, I mean, I can see why I would want to own art still, why photography shouldn't replace art. Now, a lot of time, what you see with the second industrial revolution and urbanization, that painters like Monet, will go out and paint water lilies and natural scenes. People are wanting to get out. Now, also, you look at Monet in Venice, beautiful paintings out there. And then we see the Houses of Parliament series. Now, Impressionism is basically taking in what's coming into the senses. So the same thing could be painted several times, different ways, because every time you look at it, you get an impression. I look here and I think of like Mordor and Lord of the Rings, whereas this one just seems to be kind of a foggy day, kind of calming. That one's, a little bit, a kind of a sinister sunset there. Lots of fog there, some birds. So I've got a different impression when I'm looking at birds. And then there, just kind of a nice little peaceful sunset. So a lot of things just kind of painting their impressions. Now, also, impressionists are documenting. If you look at, one thing I was showing off yesterday during the art review is Monet, his at Gare Saint Lazare, okay, or however you say that in French, right? It's a type test. But we've got, this is where somebody might illustrate. This is what Saint Lazare, which is still like the central train station in Paris. Saint Lazare is still like, basically everything just about comes in and out of Saint Lazare. Now, this is something that Monet is going in. He comes back to Paris after painting some pretty landscapes and water lilies and all that. And you can see his impressions of industry, trains. This is something we're seeing as a product of the second industrial revolution that begins in 1850 as a result of the Bessemer process. And so we see all of these trains coming in at this point. So, that's what you're seeing there. And, where we're seeing all of these, all of these impressions that he has. So understand that Impressionism, the context is the late 19th century, looking at urbanization and the second industrial revolution. All right, a lot of folks are pressing F to pay respects in the YouTube chat. All right, so good to see y'all there. Hopefully everybody's learning something. And so from there, we've got Impressionism, some phrases that you shouldn't say in an essay. Yeah, that I would not start my essay off with throughout history. I would also, cite the documents in parentheses. I would identify the documents by the author, by what they are, not document 1 says, document 2 says, because that doesn't really lead to a complex analysis of the document. Now, if you say document 1 says, document 2 says, it doesn't necessarily count off, but generally people who write like that don't express themselves in a complex manner. And so with that, you also, so don't start out with throughout history. Also, every document has some kind of bias. So don't use the word biased or bias. So what you want to do here, whether it's, don't use the word, explain what the bias is, because there is a temptation when you use the word biased that you're like, oh, they're biased. And when we speak and we say the word biased, oh, he's biased, and we expect someone to know what we're talking about. So on this essay, don't expect someone to, to look into the, to look at that. So with that, James, how did nationalism evolve in the political sphere from an oppressed ideology to an influential one? So, James, I would note here that your differentiation here is from, from Metternich to Bismarck. Okay, so basically, if Simpleton, 372818 on Instagram lived during the early 19th century during the age of Metternich. Metternich's like, look, we're trying to uphold the conservative order. We have these conservative ideals. We want stability within states, stability between states. We want a stable social order based on a traditional social hierarchy founded on the idea of legitimacy. That the people who are in charge, they are in charge because they have a legitimate hereditary right to be in charge. So basically, you know, Queen Elizabeth will be succeeded by Prince Charles, who will be succeeded by Prince William, who will be succeeded by Prince George, so on and so forth. Okay, and so going from there, and then the line goes from George to Charlotte. And so this is legitimacy. So conservatism says that we want to preserve legitimacy. And so with that, now you have an oppressed ideology. Thanks for the likes, Helena Radford, or Helena, however we're going to say that. And so so with that, Anna Fuertes, thank you very much for the, from Puerto Rico. Awesome. Okay, so we've got folks following from Puerto Rico. Always glad to hear about people in Puerto Rico. One of these days I want to make it over there. I actually was planning to go before all the Corona stuff started. And so from there, we want to think about, you know, the Crimean War, where basically, you know, the Crimean War happens, the concert of Europe falls apart. And what we see in the 19th century, you know, we see in the mid to late 19th century that people realize I can use nationalism. Conservatives realize I can use nationalism to unify the country. Okay, and of course, if you're studying the isms and you want to get a little last minute practice, remember that my Romulus Euro Review app is available at the App Store and Google Play. Just a little public service announcement, right? And, you know, POV guy that made an app likes to sell it. Okay, so when we think about this, that Bismarck and Cavour, they realize that we can use nationalism to build states that are going to be powerful and largely conservative. Okay, so when you look at the unification of Germany, Bismarck was a conservative, but he cleverly dips into liberalism for industrialization and some of his policies that were, you know, trying to limit the influence of Catholics. We see nationalism where, you know, he is using these feelings of nationalism to build Germany, especially in the Franco-Prussian War, that we're going to use a war to cultivate nationalism, to bring the country together. And then socialism, when he does the old age pensions, the accident insurance, the health insurance. These are things that Bismarck is, you know, is doing here in order to make Prussia and Germany, by extension, more powerful. Bismarck wanted to unite Germany under Prussian dominance, which would actually make Prussia more powerful. Prussia's like basically the centerpiece of this new united Germany. We've got a lot of people in the, you know, in the chat now. Are there people in the salon what are y'all thinking in the salon? Y'all want to hear the, the Bismarck rap again? Let me check with the people in the salon. Y'all want to, you know, okay, so the people in the salon want to hear the Bismarck rap again. Okay, so some of y'all weren't here this morning. So, you know, so let's go ahead. Okay, so let me go ahead and get that going. Y'all, okay, y'all always want to hear the Bismarck rap. And remember, this is available on my SoundCloud if you're looking for something to listen to right before the exam, okay? Because we're going to wrap this up in 25 minutes so you can get on to your, you know, get onto your thing here. So you're going to need to log on at 3:30. Actually, you know what? Before I start that, let me go ahead and let's go ahead and make a little note about timing on the AP European History exam, okay? So we need to make sure that we've got, let's see, U.S. History, U.S. Gov. Actually, I don't know if I have that, but Marco Learning should have that on their profile. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get into this, into German unification. I'm the Iron Chancellor, and I feel an obligation. Okay, sorry, I messed up really quick there, but let me, sorry about that. I'm the Iron Chancellor, and I feel an obligation. Unify the German states under Prussian domination, a conservative at heart, but I've got a little trick. It's the politics of power. Call it real politics. An alliance with the liberals because I'm industry emphatic and they're secular. They like my culture cop against the Catholics and the social democrats because I'm gonna put it bluntly that Germany will never be a socialist country. I've got old age pensions and some accident insurance. If you're hurt at work, I've got your back. You've got my reassurance. Call it state socialism. Now the liberals want to hate. But without the working classes, we can't unify the state. The position of Prussia in Germany at this hour will not be determined by its liberalism, but its power. Great questions aren't decided by speeches or majorities. It's blood and iron. I'll use war to spread authority. With the Austrians as allies, we took Schleswig and Holstein, then declared war on Austria. The next step in my grand design. Prussia won in 7 weeks. Austria wasn't any match. Then it's time to provoke France with the M's dispatch. Moki led a modern army armed with telegraphs and trains. France decisively defeated, gave up Alsace and Lorraine. After unifying Germany, then I really had some clout. Now it's 1890 and I'm out. All right. Hopefully y'all enjoyed that. Okay. Y'all are okay with that. Y'all are okay with me rapping a little bit. Okay. Well, good that y'all like that. So with that, note now what I did there, the reason that I like that one so much is I almost quoted Bismarck verbatim. I put it into a meter, but you think about the revolutions of 1848 in the Frankfurt Parliament, which tried to unite Germany on the basis of liberalism. But, to quote Bismarck almost, but to go into the lyrics from that Bismarck rap, which is available on my SoundCloud, the position of Prussia in Germany at this hour will not be determined by its liberalism, but its power. Great questions aren't decided by speeches or majorities. It's blood and iron. I'll use war to spread authority. Now, remember that Metternich was about not using war. Okay, Metternich's about not using war, while Bismarck is more than willing to do it. And Garibaldi is doing the same thing in Italy, conquering Italy by, conquest, basically. All right. So outside evidence, Claire, I typically recommend 2 sentences for outside evidence because that just makes sure that you're dedicating the time to it, that you are being specific and you're not just glossing it over. So typically I recommend 2 content-rich sentences. 1 extremely content-rich sentence would be fine. Remember, name dropping is not outside evidence. So for example, if we've got something about the Enlightenment and you're bringing in Montesquieu for outside evidence. Montesquieu, you wouldn't just mention him. Montesquieu was an Enlightenment philosopher, but Montesquieu wrote The Spirit of the Laws, in which, where he wrote that government should have separation of powers into legislative, executive, and judicial branches. So that's what you would write about Montesquieu. And you could say that Montesquieu's theories were influential. You could even, note how the United States Constitution, you could note, was influenced by that, which the United States Constitution, even though not strictly European, it is Western and it is a product of the Enlightenment. I would say that the United States Constitution is it's a document that has lots of European influence. Okay. And now just to note here, we are getting kind of close to time. And so I'm going to post on my Instagram this timing guide for the AP Euro exam, just to make sure that everybody's clear what you're about to face here. Okay. So let's make sure that we're noting this. I'm going to go ahead and post this. And just make sure that you know exactly, what's about to happen. Okay, so good luck on your AP Euro exams today. Okay, and then, okay, thanks, Marco Learning. Okay, so we've got here the timing guide, which I'm posting on my Instagram right now. Okay, so we're noting that. We've got the timing guide that we want to make sure that at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, you are expected to log in. Okay, so you want to go ahead and log into your College Board account and be ready. Okay, then at 4 o'clock, the exam's going to start. Now that's going to be something that is going, so we've got 45 minutes and then 5 minutes to submit. Now at 45 minutes, the light's going to start blinking. Okay. And at that point, you need to take that seriously. You need to finish your sentence. Somebody that I know that took the AP government exam in Florida got in touch with me after the exam. He Les Miles did. If any of y'all been in the college football for a while, Les Miles, who used to be the coach at LSU, he was a terrible clock manager. And so, the thing is that there are people who are having to retake their exam in June, not because the College Board screwed up, but because they didn't take the warning seriously. They thought, oh yeah, I can keep working. This is really like, it's code for 50 minutes. 45 plus 5, that's code for 50 minutes. Don't do that. 45, you need to be, if you're working outside of the College Board platform, you need to paste your stuff in there, finish your sentence, submit it. Okay. I wouldn't be, if you see a 48, you should not ever see 48. I would not bring it into the 2 minutes. 45 minutes, paste your stuff into the College Board interface, finish your sentence, submit it as soon as you can. You don't want to take your essay. You don't want to take your exam again in June. Okay. That's something that you don't want to do. And so as far as that goes, yeah, so Najma, as I've mentioned before, the Crimean War is basically putting an end to the concert of Europe by putting the great powers at war with each other. That's kind of seen as the end of the concert of Europe. All right, Disraeli and Gladstone. Okay, what we want to note here is Disraeli and Gladstone, a couple of things here, which this is something a lot of people ask about, but at the same time, it could come up, and I think some of it's relevant. And one thing I want to note here is that William Gladstone was really like the last true classical liberal that was, he's really like, I call him the last of the liberals, because after Gladstone, the Liberal Party abandons aspects of economic liberalism. And it's actually the Conservative Party that becomes more economically liberal in the sense of advocating free markets and little government intervention. And so Gladstone, one thing that Gladstone did was, his parliament passed the Irish Church Disestablishment Act of 1869. And so the Irish Church Disestablishment Act was an act that basically said that the Church of Ireland, okay, now, basically, the Church of Ireland was a branch of the Church of England. Now, y'all know that, that people, we know that Irish people are Catholic. They tend to be Catholic. And yet they were supporting the Church of Ireland, which was a Protestant church. And so what you see here is Gladstone disestablishes the Church of Ireland, says that we are going to separate the Church of Ireland from the Church of England, and the Church of Ireland is going to be disestablished. Now, he wouldn't have been able to disestablish the Church of England. The Church of England is still established today in England. Now, note that it only receives government funds to preserve buildings. Okay, so the Anglican Church, is not established in the sense that people have to support it with taxes other than historic preservation, and people don't have to take communion in the Anglican Church, but it's still an established church in England. And so what happens is Gladstone, is separating church and state in Ireland. And so that's something that is very liberal of him. Now, Disraeli was a big supporter of imperialism. He was the favorite of Queen Victoria. Okay, so he was the favorite of Queen Victoria, and he got Queen Victoria the title of Empress of Africa. Okay, so imperial, not Empress of Africa, Empress of India, not Empress of Africa, Empress of India. Okay, and so Empress of India. And so because she wanted to have a title kind of like her relatives, like in Russia and other places. So, he gets her that fancy title so that she's like on par with some of the other royals. And she loved him for that. Victoria loved Disraeli. She wasn't such a fan of Gladstone. And Disraeli and Gladstone were not fans of each other. They kept basically alternating as prime minister. Now, another thing we want to note about Disraeli that I typically mention is Benjamin Disraeli, Benjamin the Israeli. Benjamin Disraeli was an ethnic Jew. He converted to Anglicanism as either a child, teenager, or young man. He converted to Anglicanism, but just note that in the eyes of Europeans at that time, British people at that time, they saw Disraeli as a Jew. And he's still the prime minister. So you see here that Benjamin Disraeli is an example of Jewish assimilation in the late 19th century. Now, the Dreyfus affair is the opposite of this. Okay, the Dreyfus affair represents, Alfred Dreyfus, who is someone who went to the French military academy, became a French military officer. But then, as soon as, well, it looks like somebody sold some secrets to the Germans, it must be the Jew. They put him on trial. They found him guilty. Later on, evidence was produced that he wasn't guilty. Well, you know what happened? He was retried and he was found guilty again. And finally, it was like retried a third time. Eventually, he was exonerated. But this showed like just this anti-Semitic circus of the Dreyfus affair convinced a lot of European Jews that no matter what we do to assimilate here, we are not going to, we're never going to be accepted by the mainstream population. And that's what motivated Theodor Herzl to write, Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, where, we see here that Herzl was the father of Zionism, Herzl. And so, Herzl says we need a Jewish state. Then the thing is, the odds are we're not necessarily going to see this on Zionism, but we want to note here that Zionism is a form of nationalism. Okay, so that's something, Zionism is a form of nationalism. So we want to be aware of that we focus that into this, into nationalism. So with that, that's Disraeli and Gladstone, and also getting into, Jewish assimilation and Zionist nationalism. And also note that, 90% of Jews, lived in the late 19th century in Europe, whereas today, 90% of Jews either live in Israel or the United States. How many minutes should we plan out our essay? Dylan, I typically think that if you invest 5 to 10 minutes in reading the documents, and then you've got another 5 minutes or so to plan your document. So I think that the planning of the essay should take about 15 minutes, because you want to choose your documents, you want to read the documents, you want to choose them, you want to organize them. I recommend pre-writing. It is very difficult to score points on this, on this rubric without pre-writing. And so, which the pre-writing guide that I've got on my DBQ page, Euro DBQ page on my website, that link, has the Marco Learning Guide, or if you want to replicate that on, with using my Google Doc template, that's fine. Okay. But I would say about 15 minutes to read and plan. Now, the 15 minutes is reading and also pre-writing your essay. And then you've got 30 minutes left to write your essay. Now, if you pre-write appropriately, you're going to see that you've separated the thinking and the writing process. And that's something that's very important, is separating the thinking and the writing process. And so with that, I would say 15 and 30 would be my target, because that way you're setting up your essay for success. And so, so as far as that goes, Claire, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about your question here. I don't know the answer to that. That's fascinating. I don't know the answer to that question, which if you know that and you can use that to illustrate anti-Semitism, then that would be useful, but it's not something that I'm, that's immediately apparent to me. And so going from there, let's go ahead and take a question about late 19th and early 20th century intellectuals. Okay, so one thing that we want to note here is that we see in the late 19th and early 20th century, we see some trends in intellectualism that are going away from the principles of the Enlightenment, basically the principles of rationality. Everything makes sense. Now, on one hand, you've got positivism, which is basically like we follow science and we do think we go with what is certain and what is evidence-based. Okay, so a positivist, now positivism is not like positive thinking, like positivism. It is about, like, for example, just positive being certain. Like if I said, I just tested positive for the coronavirus, or I just tested negative, so I'm positive that I don't have it or haven't had it. So positivism is basically focusing on what is known. Okay, it's focusing on what is known and not what is unknown or speculative. Okay, so you see where Darwin is a positivist, because Darwin is putting out this theory of evolution that rejects traditional thinking in terms of how people came onto the earth, and is using an evidence-based approach to offer another explanation of how species diversified. So then of course you've got Freud, who is like, look, we've got a subconscious, the id, the ego, and the superego are all negotiating, and we've got like repressed memories and all of our, the things that we want to do that we're not able to do because society would judge us. And so, all these young men who are attracted to their mother, and they've had to repress that, and it causes them problems. Nietzsche, who rejects Christian morality and the very idea of a set morality. Nietzsche believes that Christianity has promoted, basically a culture of weakness. And so he calls for a transvaluation of values, new values, to go along with what he sees as human nature. But note here that Nietzsche refuses to say that there is any like set morality, but he advocates for, another morality aside from tradition. So these are some things that we want to note. Nietzsche is also an example of an existentialist. Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, who are rejecting traditional rational approaches, and they both dabble in absurdism, which is like, basically, life doesn't make sense. The world doesn't make sense. And of course, if you go forward to stuff that's not on the exam, like Dada art and stuff like that, we see the absurd. So as far as that goes, we could see the intellectual movement. So, Najma, to answer your question, the intellectual movements could come up on the exam because those are in the first 7 units. But as far as that goes, stuff that's during or after World War I, not going to be on there. All right, so with that, we've got one last question from Dylan. What was the difference between the first and second industrial revolution? Okay, so as far as that goes, that was the first industrial revolution. You've got the mass production of textiles, spinning jenny, steam engine. That's happening in the mid-18th century, about 1760 to 1830. And then we've got the second industrial revolution, 1850 to 1914, which is focusing on the mass production of steel and, of course, the internal combustion engine, experiments with chemicals, telephones, telegraphs, automobiles, which telegraphs are predating that a little bit. But basically, the world is getting more and more connected during the second industrial revolution, which comes to its maturity after World War I. All right, are there any questions? We've got, a few minutes before y'all have to log in. Is there any, I've read The Potato King a couple times. Does anybody want to hear The Potato King? Want me to sing the Napoleon song? Anything like that, as we're closing out? Because it's getting about ready to log in. We probably should give our brains a little bit of a break. Okay, so what are y'all thinking? Okay, so we've got, now we could do both of them. We probably got time to do both. But as far as that goes, yeah, I can read to y'all, and then I can sing to y'all while y'all are logging into your College Board interface. Okay, so Claire says both. Okay, I just got this really cool book on Amazon, which I'm going to display it prominently. So it's like I'm trying to make sure I want people to buy the book. It's like teachers, would love this book. This is a book about Frederick the Great, an enlightened absolutist. Okay, so, and it goes into why he's known as the Potato King. And so what we've got here, let's go ahead and read the book. The Potato King by Christoph Niemann. There was once a king called Fritz. One day, he heard about a new wonder plant from South America, the potato. He planted a big field in a nearby village, and he spoke to his citizens. Here, here, I give you the potato. It costs little to grow, and is healthy to boot. Oh my goodness, I tore my book. Okay, the people, however, didn't like to be told what to eat. Fritz was upset. Then he had an idea. I can't believe I tore my book. Okay. He ordered his soldiers to march to the village. Look at that Prussian military. Remember, Prussia was the 12th largest country in Europe, had the 4th largest military. Okay, the Prussians were especially known for their militarism. Even though absolutism was inherently militaristic, the Prussians were the best at it. So he told the army to go and guard the potato field. Thought the villagers, if a vegetable has to be so closely guarded, there must be something special about it. The king had ordered the guards to go easy on their watch at night, baiting the locals to steal the crop for their own gardens. The potato flourished and has lived on as a key ingredient in local kitchens ever since. This story may be a myth, but to this day, people honor King Fritz by putting potatoes on his grave. And so that is the Potato King. Remember Frederick the Great, enlightened absolutist? Okay, so Frederick the Great, as an enlightened absolutist, he promoted the cultivation of potatoes because it was an efficient crop, high in calories. You know, remember, if you're on a diet today, people tell you not to eat potatoes. But with those people, with Prussian peasants, it's like, eat as many potatoes as you want. It's better than eating nothing, right? So Frederick is trying to improve things in Prussia in line with science, which contributes to Frederick the Great as an enlightened absolutist, the Potato King. Because potatoes really, like when you look at them, they're just really not that appetizing. So we see enlightenment from above, that people didn't like the potato. And Frederick's like, look, you need to plant potatoes. They're good for you. So another thing here, remember, you know, I'm not going to tell you not to use notes, but what I am going to tell you is sometimes the presence of notes can actually be distracting. I don't know this song completely by heart, even though I wrote it. I've practiced enough to know it completely by heart. But I find that if I don't have notes in front of me, I remember it better. So let me just kind of prove a point here that you want to try to be as independent as possible, even though there's the open book, open notes. That's going to take some time. And if you get a prompt that you're comfortable with, if you're like, you know what, I'm comfortable with this, I can do 2 pieces of outside evidence, I can do this on my own, I would just go ahead and put the notes away and I would get started. So I'm going to demonstrate that. Now, sometimes I'm going to have to think a little bit, but then I'm going to find the lyrics are in my brain. After all, I wrote them. So this is a song about Napoleon. It's called Napoleon, and it is on my SoundCloud if you want to hear it some other time. It was 1812 and the French emperor said that Russia couldn't trade with the British anymore. With a military genius leading 500,000 men, the Grand Army can't do anything but win. Napoleon, the French Revolution brought you to your throne. The continental system, trade with Britain must cease. It's the only way that Europe will ever know peace. Will we ever know peace? Coming back from Russia, not as many as before. The French Grand Army ain't so grand anymore. Watch Moscow burn with the fires of hell, and our retreat, it didn't go so well. Napoleon, you wanted Borodino, but you couldn't win the war. Time to raise a new army with a spree to gore, cause the Sixth Coalition's coming back for more. Yeah, they're coming back for more. Battle of the Nations fought with Europe's armies, just like Leonidas faced the Persians at Thermopylae. I wanted to keep fighting, but then after a debate, the generals all decided it was time to abdicate. Napoleon, they exiled him to Elba, but he was escape prone. For 100 days he was back on the throne, but Wellington defeated him and now he's gone. Oh, now he's gone. And now he's gone. Y'all should be logging in right now, okay? So go ahead and start logging in. Go ahead and log into your College Board account. Time to do that. Looking at the stars and they're shining so bright. The view from St. Helena so pretty at night. But in the South Atlantic something doesn't feel right. Not a war, not a battle, not a triumph in sight. In middle of nowhere, not exactly paradise. And the English governor doesn't treat me very nice. Stomach ulcer, loneliness, I'm in such Strive just 6 more years till the end of my life. Press F to pay respects. All right, yes, all right. In 1840, they brought you home, built an unmarked tomb beneath a classical dome. Now you're guarded by a dozen angels made of stone, and on the 17th of June, you were not alone. You were not alone. Napoleon, the French Revolution brought you to your throne. There's rumors about your height, they were overblown. Made your mark on history, so you'll never be gone. Oh, no, you'll never be gone. No, you'll never be gone. All right, ladies and gentlemen, and with that, it is time for y'all to get ready for your exam. Make sure you're logged in, relax. And it's been great. I tell you what, it's been a great year, and I'm looking forward to another year of leading some of you to other exams in AP Euro and, AP Push, AP Gov. And thank you again. It has been a pleasure. Always a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. Good luck, everyone.